Hey guys, hi, welcome back to my channel. It's me, Steven. One day when I grow up, I'm going to learn how to edit videos and I'm going to get a really nice background because this corner is getting really tired and I'm looking at the angle of the stuff in it. It's just wrong. Hi, welcome back. So I wanted to film a little video about my experience with recurrent training. Recurrent is my what we call our annual recertification, so we can remain an active duty flight attendant for another year. My nose always itches when I film a video. So I want to share a little bit about what happened yesterday and kind of how I prepared and how I should have prepared, honestly. So last year I prepared for like 2 months before recurrent. I was so anxious last year, but I had all of my notes from my in-flight training, and back then we carried a paper FAM, a flight attendant manual, as well as a digital device which had our FAM on there as well. We were in what's called a dual carry phase, whatever, where we had to carry both. Eventually, like we are today, working towards just carrying a digital version of our FAM, which is fantastic. But having 2 copies of my FAM, I really had to know how to find pertinent information in the paper version as well as the digital version. And so I was really very, very familiar with our FAM in both versions. And back then, we didn't have that many bulletins. Other companies might call them different things, but in my airline, when there's information that has changed or will be added to the next revision of our flight attendant manual, we have something called a bulletin. So it's new information that supersedes the information in the FAM that will be replaced in the new version of the FAM once it's approved by the FAA. For example, and I'm going off on a tangent, for example, in our current copy of the FAM, it says for a particular reason, we need 1 original document in one particular experience, and we need 5 copies of it. Well, that has changed, and we only need 1 original and 4 copies. But it still says 5 in my FAM. The bulletin is put out to remind me and to let me know that the information is new, and later on down the road, hopefully soon, when the FAA approves of our revision of the FAM, that will go into the FAM and replace the information that's there. So the bulletins are really, really, really important because it's the current information where sometimes the FAM might be behind, right? Our revision is probably coming up very, very soon, and I'm looking forward to that because I hate these bulletins. Because you look for information in your FAM and you think, well, was there a bulletin on that? Let me go search. It's irritating. All right, so last year I was very familiar with my FAM. I was familiar with the few bulletins we had, and I had all of my notes from the training before. So I approached it like studying 2 months before, solid, nonstop, as if I were training for the job in the first place. And I really dedicated myself for 2 months of study. This year, I think complacency kind of fell into a part of this, in that, when I do this job so often, I fly a lot. I know all of that. I know how to pre-flight my emergency equipment. I can tell the instructor how to pre-flight. Forgetting there's very particular phrases they want to hear, I know how to pre-flight my POB. To pre-flight a POB, we have 2 different types of them. I can look at the POB without even touching them. I can look at all the POBs and see, yep, we're good, no problem. But during recurrent, I have to verbally express what I'm looking for, where I'm looking for it, what does the green dial say, and blah, blah, blah. So, I just did not prepare as well as I could have, as I did last year. There are things I looked at for the first time at 10 o'clock the night before recurrent. I just was not prepared. I meant to study. I brought my laptop with me on every layover to do my assigned work, our assigned distance learning on a company website. I did all that, but I really meant to study on layovers. And in the end, I ended up playing video games frequently. Yeah, life lesson here. I learned my lesson. I did not approach this year as dutifully as I did last year, and I should have. I should have, because I heard horror story after horror story of people failing recurrent. One girl recently failed a number of times, and she's still flying, but she had to wait like 3 months before she could actually fly after retaking her recurrent the third time, something like that. And if you fail recurrent enough, I don't know what that number is, you have to literally go to some like back to in-flight training or something. Not something I ever want to find out about, but so I was very anxious and I wasn't prepared, and so I didn't cry, which is weird because during my initial training I cried before every single test. Um, so yesterday I woke up early. I woke up about 5 o'clock. Um, I got ready for work. I went out and found Buddy to bring him in for the day. So he and Eleanor spent the whole day together yesterday, and they really did well. At least they didn't kill each other, and there's no evidence of real fighting. So I think they did okay. And then I went out to Subway, which is open 24 hours near my house, and I got two breakfast sandwiches because it could handle just sitting in a fridge for most of the day without getting gross. So I ate one for breakfast and I kept a second one for lunch. And then I went off to the training center. I got there about 20 minutes early, which is on time for me. On time is late for me. So I got there about 20 minutes early, signed in, and settled in, and feverishly read through notes I had with me. But it was just too late. It was really too late. Um, what was the day like? Stressful. Thankfully, one of my coworkers, who I really, really love, has become an in-flight recurrent trainer. So she is now one of the instructors, and I love her and I trust her. So it was great to have her there. And one of the instructors from my initial training was there as well doing recurrent. So I was facing people I knew and trusted, which made this whole experience a lot better. They're both like real human beings, you know. Um, and then The first third of the day was spent sort of refreshing over information that we already knew or should already know. And when we were hitting on something that, they couldn't tell us, hey, this is on the test, but they'd stress this, you might want to remember this for later. you know, um, so, uh, so we went over a lot of information, stuff that we go through daily and some things that we don't. And it was really, really helpful. It calmed my nerves a little bit. Next, we went through probably, I don't know if it was 40 minutes or longer, maybe 45 minutes, talking about a program that my company has recently created on the topic of educating people on human trafficking. And it was disturbing because we had to really listen to a lot of really horrific statistics. It's just an awful thing. And just the amount of money that changes hands in this country over the buying and selling of people in 2019 is horrific. And so we spent probably 45 minutes talking about human trafficking and all that stuff. And I'm really looking forward to going back to work at the end of the month to put into practice some of the things that I learned, and just look for things that I now will be much more aware of. We talk about human trafficking every year, it's part of our program. But this year was really particularly stressed. And because there's actually been a number of cases over the last year or two where our flight attendants have helped save lives in capturing or identifying victims of human trafficking while they're on board. So it was really stressed this year, quite a lot. The next part was we had to do our boards, and doing your boards is kind of like when you're in flight training. When you're in training, you have to be able to look at each piece of emergency equipment and be able to pre-flight check that piece of information, tell the instructor how long that piece of equipment is going to last in action, how long the battery might last, what's the difference between this type of equipment and this type of equipment. So that's very similar. We had to tell them, and like, what do you do with it after you use it, and all sorts of stuff. During recurrent, we had to really just focus on how do we pre-flight check our equipment. And that sounds easy because, when I get on an aircraft, I can pre-flight what's under my jump seat. And what's under my jump seat, under most of our jump seats, there's a couple exceptions. There's a couple. I'm going to find a halon, which is what we use for our fire extinguisher. I'm going to find an MRT, which is a manual release tool to open up a PSU if I need to get masks to drop. And I'm going to find a crew life vest. That's the three things I'm usually going to find under most jump seats. There's a couple exceptions. And there's one addition depending on where you sit on a very particular aircraft. But I can do that with just looking. But during recurrent, I have to look at each individual item and let my instructor know what I'm looking for. For example, I'm off on another tangent. We have two types of POBs, a portable oxygen bottle. We have a newer one, which has to turn it on to the high flow that we might use, or the low flow, which we probably wouldn't use. You turn the dial from the red to the green to the number that you need, and you check your mask. Is the air flowing? Is the oxygen flowing? Can you squeeze it? Is the bag filling up? Do you smell anything? Is anything weird going on there? And then how do you carry that piece of equipment to your victim? And then the other one, there's two valves, and you have to look at, and both have a similar little gauge, and you have to make sure it's in the green. And there's two valves, and you have to make sure the mask is stuck in one. And you have two masks per blah, blah, blah. You have to be able to really accurately, confidently describe your pre-flight for all of your equipment. And you do it just by looking at it when you're working. But saying it verbally to an instructor I don't know why it's so stressful, but I found it stressful. I passed that, no problem. There are some phrases that are, for some reason, stuck, like on our halon, the black safeguard lever is used to break the wire hasp, which is the seal. We have to do that before you can actually use the device. For some reason, that phrase stuck in my head, and the instructor was like, whoa, good job. The next thing was we had to do our CPR drills. And that, first off, we had to pull that POB out and show our instructor how we would use it in the event of an actual need of a portable oxygen bottle. Thankfully, not so thankfully, but I just had to do this last week with one of our guests. So it was very, very fresh in my mind. Things you have to remember, though, and your airline might be different, but in my airline, before you put that mask on them, you have to wipe their nose and their mouth with, a non-alcohol something. And there's just little things you could forget to do if you were stressed out. But I did that, great, no problem. And then we went right into our CPR drills, which I find very stressful. There's one small change, which is a big change, but there's one small change that we do in our CPR drill from what we used to do in our CPR drill. And I was so freaked out about doing that thing we used to do, but we don't do anymore. I was so freaked out. I was thinking about that while I was trying to do the other things, and it was just throwing me off. And I didn't do it as well as I wished I had in the clean, natural order. I did pass that drill, but if I were in initial training, I don't think they would have passed me on that, honestly. I know what to do, but I was just so stressed out about that one stupid thing. Excuse me. So I did pass my CPR drill. And then we went to lunch. We had 45 minutes for lunch. And everyone, there's probably 7 of us at Recurrent this year. And we all went to the crew lounge. We went to the lunchroom and we all sat there and started throwing questions at each other to, refresh ourselves, get us in the mindset to answer our questions for our final exam. And that was great for 5 or 6 minutes. And then I realized I wasn't getting anything out of it. I knew all the answers to the questions they were throwing around, which isn't to brag. It's just that how many lap children are we allowed to have in each row, which is 2 sections? So if you know how many oxygen masks drop from each section, you know how many lap children you're allowed. They're just things that I know that I didn't need to have someone throw at me in the break room. So I pulled myself away, very much like I did during in-flight training. There are just times I did not need a group setting to study. And there were things that I knew that I was weak on, and that I, again, could have been studying for the month before or 2 months before, but I just didn't. Little things that are not little, honestly, they're huge. For example, if we're doing an evacuation, land or water, there's a process, and there's a very specific process, and we have to say it verbatim, or take the action in particular order. But there's at one point where you have to look outside the window to make sure that there's no flames, no debris. You want to make sure that there's nothing out there that could be hurt or killed by that evacuation slide popping out, right? And for some reason, when I'm practicing my drills, I was forgetting this, to look out the window. I was remembering to feel the door with my hands to make sure there's no heat signifying a fire, but I was forgetting to look out the window, which is dumb because it's such an important thing and it's a big part of the drill. But so during that time, during lunch, I was just focusing on walking through my drills, remembering to look out the freaking window. And so that's what I did for most of lunch. And I inhaled my sandwich and an energy drink. And then we went in to do our drills. We had to do our 2 evacuation drills. We had to do to show that we knew how to handle the overwing window exits. We had to prove that we knew how to arm and disarm our doors. We had to show that we knew how to arm and disarm our doors in locations that are not specific to our airline. And there's a different process for that. So if we landed, for some reason, we diverted to Saskatchewan, where we don't fly. We don't have a jet bridge. We don't have air stairs. We don't have a gate agent, which is trained to open our aircraft, because all the doors are different on different aircraft. So I would have to open that door, which is not something I normally do. There's a process we have to follow in order to open that door at an airport that's not ready for us. Very specific process, starting with, hey, flight deck, do I have permission to do this? I would forget in my practice to ask permission, which is a big deal. So blah, blah, blah. So I did all the drills, and I passed all of my drills. One wasn't as smooth as I'd like it to have been, but I passed them all. Partly, again, because we had such great instructors and I knew them well, so I wasn't as anxious and terrified. And then after our drills, we had our final exam. Now, there's, I don't know the exact number. It's over 100. It's probably 150, 200 questions randomly pulled for each person. So no one got the same test. You got to a computer and you had to sit down and log in and then start answering your questions when we officially could start taking that test. I think we were given an hour. I don't remember because I did it, I don't know, 15 minutes less, which worried me because, I was just answering questions and the questions just seemed silly to me. Maybe I got lucky and got the easy ones, but a question would pop up, what's 2 + 2? And the 3 answers would be 4, elephant, carnivore. You choose 4, right? And go on to the next one. And the next question seemed relatively simple. So I just answered all the questions and I got through them really fast. And I worried about that because eh, was I reading the questions thoroughly? Something you have to do because sometimes they'll phrase questions a little screwy and they'll throw you off by phrasing a question the wrong way or a different way. So I wanted to go back and look at all of my questions. I asked one of the instructors, I said, hey, how do I go back and reread these questions to make sure I have them right? And she cautioned me and she said, Stephen, when people fail these tests, it's frequently because they second guess themselves. So she couldn't say don't do it, but she was definitely cautioning me, knowing me, to really trust myself the first time. But I had to do it. So I went through all of them again and I didn't change anything. And you hit submit and you see whether or not you pass right away. I got one wrong. And it was a dumb one. It was a dumb one. And I read it twice and I answered it the same way twice. It was just dumb. The question, I can't even ask the question because then someone who works for my airline would be like, well, you shouldn't have said that. So it was just a question I really honestly knew the answer to and I answered it wrong twice. So I passed recurrent. Yay. And it was sort of anticlimactic because there's no like, yay, we passed. You just leave the room. And so I walked out into, boy, this is already long, 22 minutes almost. I walked out of the training center into a brilliant, beautiful, sunny spring day in Las Vegas. Having proven myself one more year to be a flight attendant in a job I adore, in a company I love. And I was in this beautiful environment in this gorgeous sun with the palm trees. And I was going back to my little studio apartment, which is filthy, but it's my studio apartment filled with two cats that I just love. And I was just so overwhelmed with gratitude for my life in general that's when I chose to cry. It was pretty fantastic. So I got an Uber home. I splurged on an Uber, and I came home, and it was really nice. And I celebrated. I celebrated by bringing myself out to dinner. I went to Panda Express. I know, fancy, right? I went to Panda Express, and then I went to McDonald's, and I got myself a milkshake. That was my celebrating. And today, if you watched my last video, I went out to PetSmart. But this evening, I should say, I got a message from one of my coworkers at a different base. He's a friend of mine, and he had recurrent today, and he failed. He failed the test. He got 6 wrong, and I'm not sure how many you're allowed wrong. Can't be many. 3? I don't know, 4? I think you can get 3 wrong. If you get 4 wrong, I think you fail the test, and he got 6 wrong. But the problem I really think is, as I mentioned, phrasing is important. I really think because English is his second language, he's a native Spanish speaker. I think some of the phrasing honestly threw him off, and I think he agreed that it was some of the phrasing that really kind of misled him. So honestly, he's going to be able to retake it. I just hope that he takes the time he has to look those questions more thoroughly. Now, I can only speak for my experience in my airline. I won't speak for anybody else's, but I will encourage you, if you're in that boat, if you're in the second language boat, ask your instructors before your test, are you able to rephrase questions for me if I'm not reading them correctly in this test? Now, in my in-flight experience, when I was in training, they were able to rephrase questions if I wasn't able to understand how the question was written, because sometimes they kind of play with it. Ask your instructors before the test, are you able to rephrase a question? And if it's a question like what's 2 plus 2, they're not going to be able to rephrase that question. But if it's a question like Well, what are numbers that you might use to describe a certain, whatever? They might be able to rephrase a question where you go, oh, yeah, yeah, no, no, I get that. I understand that. Where the original phrasing might have thrown you off. So if you can do that, make use of that, because I'll tell you, it saved my bacon in training. No, I didn't use it yesterday, but if I did on that one question, I would have gotten 100. All right. Well, this video is already too long, but I am officially a flight attendant for another year. Yay, me! And I get to spend the next week and a half off without the anxiety of recurrent facing me again. So there you go. It was a good day. I wish I had prepared more, but I passed, which is all that's important, right? Okay. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that helps some of you, or if you found that interesting. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them below, and I will talk to you later. Fly safe. Bye.